A statement from the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds.
With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to update the House on the Government's response to the Horizon scandal and how appropriate it is to see you in the chair, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a former Business and Trade Minister yourself. My priority as the new Secretary of State is in ensuring that victims of this scandal receive the address they deserve. Over the past few weeks, I've begun meeting with some of the postmasters whose lives have been so badly damaged by these events. Their stories are harrowing, but their resilience and steadfastness in seeking justice is inspiring. I'm grateful for their candour too, in sharing insight on how the various compensation schemes can be improved. If I may make a personal point here, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know I speak for members and friends across the House, when I say it fills me with sadness to have to stand here today and address such a significant failure of the state. The role of government must be to do right, to seek justice and to defend the oppressed. And yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has too often been the case that government has had to be forced into action by brave and tireless and resilient campaigning. So once again, I pay tribute to the Justice for Some Postmasters Alliance, to campaigners like Joe Hamilton, to Lee Castleton and Sir Alan Bates. And incidentally, I would just like to add some personal congratulations to Sir Alan on his recent wedding. Without their tireless efforts, justice may well never have been done in this case. And as we stand and sit here today, in the shadow not just of this scandal, but of Grenfell, of infected blood and several more, I know it is the firm conviction of everyone in this House that we must do better. This is not an issue of politics, but of justice. And in that spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot speak of the new government's work to address this wrong without again acknowledging and appreciating the work of Lord Arbuthnot, of the new Lord Beamish, formerly the Member for North Durham, and my friend the Honourable Member for Thirsk and Malton for his work as Minister. The announcements that we make today are built on their efforts to hasten redress payments and to quash wrongful convictions. Earlier in the summer, the new government announced the launch of the Horizon Conviction Redress Scheme. And I'm pleased to report that the first payments have been issued and good progress has been made on processing the claims received to date. As was the case on the GLO scheme, the Department will be setting a target of making the first offer to 90% of claimants who have submitted a full claim within 40 working days. Additionally, the Post Office have now settled over 50% of cases on the overturned conviction scheme, with 57 out of 111 cases fully settled. The Department has also now received over 50% of GLO claims and settled over 200 of those. Progress has also been made on implementing the £75,000 fixed sum awards on the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. As of the 30th of August, over 1,350 claimants who previously settled below the £75,000 threshold have been offered top-ups to bring them to this amount. And the Post Office will shortly begin making fixed sum offers to new claimants. Now, these interventions will have a significant impact on ensuring postmasters can access redress swiftly and simply. However, we recognise that this option will not suit everyone and does not address all the concerns raised by postmasters and their representatives. And that is why we are taking further action today. The Horizon Compensation Advisory Board recommended last year that we should introduce an independent appeals process for the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. Today I'm pleased to announce that we have accepted their recommendation. This appeals process will enable claimants who've settled their claim under the HSS to have their case reassessed with the benefit of any new information that they were not able to include in the original application. It will be delivered by my department in-house, and we will apply the lessons learned from redress schemes to date to ensure that the process is easy for postmasters to engage with and that outcomes are delivered at pace. We will announce further details in the coming months. There will be no obligation for postmasters to appeal their settlement, and no doubt many will be content that their claims have been resolved fairly. I know that financial redress will never fully compensate victims for their suffering, but we want to help bring some closure to postmasters as soon as we can. And that is why we will establish the new appeals process as quickly as possible. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, the new government will do everything in our power to deliver justice for postmasters, to bring them closure, and to ensure that such a national tragedy is never allowed to happen again. And I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you so much. No doubt a statement that will mean a lot to many constituents, including those in my constituency of Sussex Weald. Shadow Minister Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also thank the Secretary of State for his advance sight of this statement and for his very kind words, and I can assure him we'll continue to work collaboratively to put the interests of postmasters first. I'd also like to associate myself with the congratulations offered by the Secretary of State to Sir Alan Bates and now Lady Suzanne Bates, and indeed the recognition of their contribution and that of others. As we promised from this side of the House during the very first urgent question of the Parliament, Ministers opposite know they receive our full support to deliver compensation swiftly and quash the convictions of those wronged by this terrible tragedy. The Secretary of State sets out in his statement a new appeals process for those who have already settled their claim under the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. I welcome this step. I know the Department are implementing the work of the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board, who were instrumental during my time in office and no doubt will be supporting the new government. I do, however, have some questions about his statement. He confirms that the appeals process will be open for claimants who have settled their claim under the HSS, but it is restricted to those who have new evidence to support their case. In the same breath, he recognises lessons learned from redress schemes to date, indicating his department are aware of the flaws in the scheme, which I also acknowledge. So will the appeals process also be available, crucially, as it should be, to all claimants, not just with those with new information? Because given the accepted flaws in the scheme, it would be wrong to leave individuals without the opportunity for appeal. And is it the case that if people choose the £75,000 top-up, they'll be entitled to appeal? Because if this is the case, there's a risk that those wanting to go the appeal process, that will be a slower process because of the number of people seeking to appeal. Secondly, he said the appeals process will be up and running as soon as possible. Please, can he set out a specific timeline? And finally, on appeals, can he tell the House if these individuals will be entitled to legal representation, as is the case in the GLO process? If I could also ask the Secretary of State some questions on the broader compensation schemes. £289 million has been paid to over 2,800 claimants across 4 schemes. Of these figures, however, I was alarmed to find only 6 claims have been offered through the Horizon Convictions Redress Scheme, and no full and final settlements have yet been made through that scheme. Can he explain those numbers? I was also concerned to hear the Secretary of State say last week that only 130 letters, I think of the 700 total postmasters who have had convictions quashed, have been written to, and that this was a matter for the Ministry of Justice rather than his office. I'm sure he realises finger pointing within government will not wash with people who have been through these difficulties and these horrendous scandals. So I must therefore push him on what steps he has taken to mitigate the delays in sending out letters to those affected. And can I finally ask him, delaying all the schemes is partially at least as a result of an adversarial process of lawyers arguing with lawyers. As a remedy, we were working very closely with on the appointment of Sir Gary Hickinbottom, scheme reviewer in the overturned conviction scheme, to be appointed across all 3 schemes to expedite claims. And can he confirm that this vital appointment has now been made?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for his response and the tone and the collaboration that we have tried to model when we were sitting in opposite places. I do believe that was something that helped advance what was a difficult piece of legislation, particularly in a wash-up process, to put on the statute book, but was, I think, the only real vehicle for delivering what we all wanted to see. He's asked me a number of absolutely reasonable questions, which I'm happy to respond to him on. In relation to the issue of a situation where someone has already received the top-up to £75,000, he is right to say under the appeal scheme would not be available to them. It is a choice between the two best methods of redress of satisfaction for the postmaster. I recognise what he's saying, that given the issues around speed of delivering redress, it would not be satisfactory to anyone to have that system clogged up. But I think both options, therefore, represent reasonable ways forward for people who are in that position. He asks specifically about the remit of the appeals scheme. I will listen to what he is saying. The reason we're announcing today that we will take this forward, but then we'll consult with postmasters themselves in order to make sure the eligibility criteria are correct, which on the timeline question he raises is just a matter of months, is to make sure we don't have to revisit this, that we can all be satisfied that, crucially, postmasters themselves have confidence within it, and that is the intention. So I'm grateful to him for those comments around it. On his question in relation to legal representation, yes, that is part of the scheme. Again, I think learning the lessons of where we've been in the past. Most of the schemes, as he knows, have now been able to be adjusted to reflect that, but for new announcements, absolutely take that. On the difficulty that has existed with the Horizon Conviction Redress scheme, I want to be clear. I'll give him the figures to update the House, but so far 180 letters have gone out from the Ministry of Justice, including those letters and the people who've then come back and registered with the government who haven't, perhaps in all cases, received a letter yet. There's now 276 claimants who have had that. I would make the appeal again that whilst we are doing everything we can with Ministry of Justice colleagues to make sure those letters go out, people can proactively register with the government. I'll be frank, this has been a frustration. I think when he and I were having the conversations when we sat in different places, neither of us perhaps knew the state of the database and the records and the frustrations we would face having passed the legislation getting to people, but clearly that is absolutely integral to sorting this out. And finally, his question on the scheme reviewer, I will come back to him on that if I may. I'll write to him to tell him the absolute up-to-date situation with that. But I say again in summary, we will work with all parties, we will work with all postmasters to get redress at pace and to learn the lessons of where things have not gone well in the past, to make sure new announcements carry the confidence of the people who really do need to have confidence within them.
Please continue to bob if you want to be called. I'm going to call everybody. I know the Secretary of State will want to respond to them as well. The previous Select Committee Chair, Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my congratulations to Sir Alan Bates and Lady Suzanne for what looked like a very happy day. And I want to welcome what the Secretary of State has set out for the House this afternoon. When our Select Committee reported back in March, we said that trust in the Post Office was fundamentally broken, that the appeal scheme needed to be independent, and this is an important step in that direction. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, what sub-postmasters have said to me this morning is that there is still a problem with the time it takes to get offers back when an offer is contested. So the claimant's lawyers have got a fixed amount of time to put in a claim. Where it is then contested, it is taking far, far too long for Addleshaws in particular to come back and provide a second offer. What comfort can the Secretary of State give them in today's announcement? Because this whole House agrees that justice delayed is justice denied.
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He will hopefully see his work as Chair of the Select Committee reflected in this announcement today, specifically that we are setting the target to issue initial offers to 90% of claims within 40 working days of receiving a full claim. And just on that point of how that is defined, a full claim is one where, following legal assessment, it's deemed it does not require any further evidence to assess the claim further. So once that is in, the targets that his Select Committee has quite rightly called for in order to make sure redress is delivered at speed are now part of this process.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for sight of the statement and indeed for his decision to come to the House at this early stage to update us on the progress. I think it's worth saying that we are dealing with a catastrophic injustice that has affected hundreds upon hundreds of families, people who've paid with their livelihoods and in some cases tragically with their lives. And there is a complete lack of trust in government, whatever political colour, over the last 20 or so years because of this. And that's why the answers that he gives to the questions that have been raised already about the number of sub-postmasters who've been paid interim payments, only 6 under the last data available under the Horizons Convictions Redress Scheme, that is such a key issue. And likewise, as we've just been looking at that only the latest data showing fewer 1 in 6 wrongly accused postmasters having received letters confirming the quashing of their convictions. And given this sense of lack of trust, mistrust in government of whatever kind and in the post office management as a whole, I wonder if he might also turn his thoughts to rebuilding trust in the post office management and in the network in the long term. In the eyes of the public, I think the brand of the post office is solid, but in the eyes of those who work within the industry and those who may come in as sub-postmasters in the future, it is far less so. So we were delighted in my constituency recently to see reopenings of post offices in Shap, Kirby, Stephen. Wonderful to see those 2 reopenings, but I can tell him that in Grasmere and in Hawkshead and in Staveley we are without post offices, and in all 3 of those cases it is because in part the former sub-postmaster, whilst not always being directly affected by the Horizon scandal, in a sense of kind of disgust with the post office management, have left the industry and left those villages without a post office. What can he say to this House and to the current cadre of sub-postmasters and those who may join them or who want to join that cadre in the future to encourage them? Will he focus on pastoral care, financial support and other things that will bring about a package of inducements and enticements so those people who feel let down so badly by the Post Office Limited management over the last 20 years will feel that the Post Office is something they can commit their lives to for the good of our communities and the country as a whole?
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Member for that question. Just specifically on the figures in relation to the Horizon Convictions Redress scheme, he is right to say there are only 6 claims or interim payments have been made so far, but I can assure him I would expect that to rise rapidly following the announcement we've made, and I'll keep the House informed as to all of that. I agree that what essentially he's asking, I think, is how redress of this scandal has to link to the future of the post office itself, and I think he's absolutely right to do so. I mentioned in oral questions last week that when I appeared before the inquiry, I think that's not just about an assurance as to the lessons that will be learnt from the inquiry, but how that will affect the decisions going forward. Like him, I've seen the post office network change a lot in my constituency. I was at the new banking hub in Stalybridge on Friday, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the public support for the brand, for the people on the front line, I think is very strong. But the business model as it stands is not one that is fit for purpose. I think postmasters deliver essential services, but they don't make enough money from those essential services. I think the money they make, too much of that goes into the centre and doesn't return to the front line in a way that is a viable business model for all of our constituencies. And these issues of how, as an organisation, the post office functions have to be tied, not just culturally, to the reforms and the redress that we're all seeking to deliver, but to the business model as well.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome today's statement on the appeals process and thank the Ministers for their engagement with me on this issue and in advance of the meetings that we'll be having later this week. Horizon victims are understandably wary of the Post Office involvement in the compensation schemes. So can the Secretary of State confirm that the appeals process that he's announced today will be completely independent of the Post Office? And can I also ask him, as well as pushing for Horizon victims to finally get full compensation, what work is the department undertaking to ensure that people are held account for their roles in this scandal?
I thank my honourable friend for her question and recognise her own contribution to this issue over many, many years. She is right to say that the scheme, the appeals process I'm announcing today, will be run in-house by the Department of Business and Trade. It will be, obviously, there'll be information that will need to be provided by the Post Office, but this is an in-house scheme that will be delivered. And in relation to redress, I think we are all following the Sir Win Williams inquiry very closely. We will need that to conclude. There will be essential information that will come out of that, but there will need to be, after that, a way to make sure that those findings, whatever they may be, are honoured in full, that we learn from those. But of course, in a number of cases, there is a need to hold people to account for their actions throughout this scandal.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Dewi Lewis of Penrhyn Dredraeth is a former sub-postmaster who endured 4 months of imprisonment and had to wear a tag for another 4 months for a crime he never committed. He hasn't wanted me to raise his case in the chamber before because he said to have his hopes raised and then dashed would destroy him. 2 weeks ago he got a letter, I'm glad to say that his convictions were quashed. But the damage that has been done to the reputation of the post office in rural Wales is so immense now that people are no longer prepared to work in post offices. How can he assure me, and I welcome that he says that he believes the business model is no longer fit for purpose, how can we be sure that we will have strategic planning to serve those communities which were once served so well by people like Dewi Lewis?
Yeah, well, again, I recognise very much what she is saying. In some cases, I have had personal friends of mine who were directly affected by this, who, even though they obviously knew I was also their MP as well as their friend, didn't feel they were able to tell me about it because they were so concerned as to the impact of their reputation. They couldn't even tell a friend who was a Member of Parliament, even though it was something that was clearly affecting their lives to a very significant degree. I'm sure, like me, she's had situations where one provider of postal services in a relatively rural area, obviously represent Greater Manchester as it gets out towards rural Derbyshire, where people want very much a service to continue, but for various business reasons the provider is moving on. It's hard sometimes to find someone willing to take that on, not just because of this scandal, but because of the business model. And I can assure her that the work we are already doing is about the future, is about recognising that, is about making sure we have the people in charge who recognise that, and that has to change. And it's going to be a very substantial piece of work for my minister and I, but I think it is essential because we couldn't just provide redress for this scandal without looking to the future and making sure we get this right.
Graham Morris.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the statement, and I also have constituents that are affected, and I'm grateful for the information about the appeal system. But just looking forward, what steps are ministers in the department taking to secure the future of the post office network and reassure people considering becoming postmasters that they are not going to face the same unacceptable culture pervading post office senior management highlighted by the select committee that led to the Horizon scandal happening in the first place?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, as I've said in previous answers to my honourable friend, we have to understand that scepticism, that concern is valid. The scale of this scandal is so large that, of course, people will challenge their members of Parliament with how they feel about what they may be asked to do, and the risk that that then poses to what is, I think, still an essential business, an essential provider of services to all our constituents is absolutely key. I would seek to reassure them by recognising the steps and the commitment we've got to redress, but also to the future of a business model that delivers the kind of remuneration and operates as an organisation in a way which recognises the scale of the failure in the past. If I was a postmaster, I would welcome those words, but I would want to see action, and that is, I think, the only way we would be able to do it.
The Chair, please. Thank you. Mims Davies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the update to the House today. We saw through the ITV series Lord Arbuthnot, like many, as an exemplary constituency MP, something for us to all to aspire to. But many had campaigned for so long in this place to recognise this scandal. And may I congratulate to Sir Alan Bates and Lady Bates on their nuptials. Can the Secretary of State assure the House that the full engagement is being undertaken with the Ministry of Justice, that the learnings are being understood, and that those expecting their convictions to be quashed will hear imminently, as all of our constituents will want to see that justice?
Well, I thank you for her question, and I echo very much her point about if there is one bit of how our political system operated in this, it is that constituency link and the classic Member of Parliament's surgery as being provided. The story as a whole is clearly one that is unsatisfactory, but I recognise very much her words in relation to Lord Arbuthnot and the cross-party campaign that came about. The Ministry of Justice issue is absolutely paramount. It is frustrating. The state of the records that have delayed the process is of real frustration to me, but I can assure her she will understand that following so much failure, Mr. Speaker, if a case emerged where a letter was sent out incorrectly, after all the people have been through, that would clearly be outrageous. And given I'm now accountable for the scheme going forward, that is what I absolutely cannot have. I could talk about some of the things we've inherited, but I don't think that's particularly helpful. I simply will give her the assurance that she quite rightly seeks that this is of maximum importance, and we're working at pace with Ministry of Justice colleagues and indeed with the devolved authorities in relation to justice systems around the United Kingdom.
Clive Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the Secretary of State's statement. And I heard what he had to say about the involvement of the Post Office in the appeals process in an earlier answer. But can I just ask him a little bit further? Because such is the mistrust of the Post Office that's built up over many, many years. Is his department satisfied that even though it may only be providing information to his department, are they satisfied of the role of the Post Office in providing that information, or have there been any occasions when you've had to challenge them perhaps, because that is the degree to which people mistrust the Post Office in this process and have done for many years?
Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that question. I think he will hear reflected in my earlier answers the point that the reason we have chosen to deliver this scheme in-house by the Department of Business and Trade reflects the kind of concerns he is quite reasonably making, and I think in terms of commanding confidence, people obviously not just want to see these schemes set up, they want to see them deliver, and that is why the updates to the House of how we are progressing under each scheme are so important, and that's something I will commit to do regularly.
Redress Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to associate myself with the comments made about the noble Lord Arbuthnot, who was a predecessor but one for part of my constituency. I know the Secretary of State has spoken about the letters that are quashing convictions, but does he not understand how important it is that those who are waiting for those letters get them swiftly? Could I ask him whether the Lord Chancellor will come to this House to give us an update on what progress is being made with those letters?
Well, I'm grateful to him for that question, and you will have heard my earlier answers. He will simply, I think, want to agree that to get this wrong in this case would be a terrible problem. Some of the errors that have existed and the problems that have caused, again, they have been a frustration. But I assure him I think it's better in matters relating to this scandal than it is the Department of Business and Trade, given that the interest of members that provides the updates around them. But I can assure him that not only is work proceeding at pace on this, that of course I'll say again, people can proactively register their credentials to make sure there is no delay if they are in a position where they know they're one of the wrong parties.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for the update today? My constituent, Mahesh, who came to visit me at our surgery on Friday, told us that he had been assured that his conviction would be overturned and he was being wrongfully convicted under this Horizon scandal. However, he's really frustrated over the length of time it's taken for that conviction to be quashed, and it is preventing him from moving on with his life. Can the Minister please kind of update us what sort of work is going on to speed up the process to quash these convictions so that people like Mahesh in my constituency can move on with his life?
Well, I'm grateful to her, and I recognise very much the conversation that she's had with her constituent and the need and the desire she will have to make sure she can progress that claim as it should be progressed. The issue is really about ensuring that the records are accurate. It's a cross-reference between Ministry of Justice databases and some of the court documents, but that is proceeding pace. If that constituent has not yet had a letter and needs to register their credentials, they again can do so, but I can assure her that again it is of maximum priority.
Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Minister for the statement. It's welcome the appeals process has been set out. I'd also like to pay some tribute to my SNP colleague and former MP, Marion Fellows, who many members will have known put a considerable amount of effort into this issue and has provided me with wise counsel on it since then. How satisfied is the Minister with the take-up so far? There's obviously some helpful detail in the statement there, and what awareness campaigns are planned. There may well still be people out there who are not aware that they can claim compensation. It's important that as many methods as possible are used to get that out there. Another point that's come up recently is that even legal experts have complained that the application form for redress systems was overly complex, and that even they as experts would struggle to fill it in. Is there any simplification of that that he can look at without obviously getting away from the key points that clearly need to be collected, the key data that needs to be collected? And finally, I would associate myself with the comments that have been made about the wider impact. It's only a week since the Grenfell report was published, and mention was made in the previous statement about the COVID contracts. Is that that goes right to the heart of trust in the government, and that's a really important point to address as we go forward.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his question, and I echo his comments in relation to Marianne Fellows and the contribution she made to this scheme. He asks how satisfied I am. I'm not going to be satisfied until everyone has had redress. It's as straightforward as that. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, to mention that in a very positive way, for instance, under the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, there was a group of claimants, it was about 2,417 people, and then following the television drama, a whole range of people who actually weren't aware they were eligible, came forward, which was an incredibly positive thing. An additional, I think, over 1,500 people came forward, and indeed members may still be finding people who, because of the awareness that caused, did come forward. Now, we should thank very much the power of arts to get that message out to people, but because of a situation like that, none of us can be satisfied until we can be sure that we've got redress to everyone. And I think that is what this Parliament collectively has to commit to.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State to outline what the government is doing to investigate the predecessor capture system? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend very much for that question. Members may know that capture was the precursor to the Horizon software. It is something which is of concern to us, and we are investigating. The forensic accountants that were appointed to look into this specific issue are due to report fairly soon, Mr. Speaker, and as soon as we have their findings, we'll be able to update the House as to future steps that may be necessary following that report.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for the statement and for the clear commitment for closure for all of those affected. The Minister used the words, the role of government is to do right, to seek justice and to defend their oppressed. And I say amen to that. That's exactly what government's role is and should do. Thank you. It is past time that our handling of this scheme comes to an end, but that can only be when every postmaster or postmistress affected has been restored reputationally and financially, but more than this, when the lessons have been put in place to ensure that never again can our reliance on computers be the vehicle of persecution. So can the Minister assure me and this House that that has been done and it is in place right now? Thank you.
Grateful to the honourable member for his contributions. I thought he may recognise those words in the opening statement that I gave from Isaiah, but the kind of failure that goes to the heart of what we're talking about today is not just about the reliance on computer systems over the testimony of people on the front line. It is also clearly about the culture of organisations, the culture of how government operates. I would like to say to him, we will definitely turn a page on all of that, but there are members here, as I have, who've been here not just for infected blood or the Grenfell statement last week, but for Hillsborough, for Bloody Sunday. We've got to reflect on what has been a very difficult set of findings. Now, I think we can commit to making sure we do learn the lessons from these and take it forward, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge to all of us who believe we're here to do good, to do, as I said in the opening statement, and there's more to do, to be clear on that, but I think we can move in the right direction, and that is certainly what myself and my government ministers will be doing, but I thank him for that.
Holly Billington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that some sub-postmasters, like one of my constituents, has experienced an enormous amount of devastation without even actually having been convicted. 30 years of a reputation absolutely destroyed. And although he has had some compensation, he still doesn't know whether he's had the right amount of money, he still doesn't know whether he's paying the right amount of tax, and still doesn't have an admission of responsibility in the failings from the Post Office. How much of that will be dealt with by this redress scheme?
Well, I thank her, and I do understand the situation and in the need to have different schemes of redress to correct specific problems. I understand the kind of feeling and sentiment that she describes from her constituent. I would like to make sure in any case like this we're doing everything we can to provide the answers, and if I would ask her to write to me specifically about this case, I can tell her I would look at it personally and make sure I can advise her so she can advise her constituent to make sure, as best as is possible to our knowledge, we can give the advice that is right.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to hear from the Secretary of State that progress is being made. I think this cannot come too soon. Recompense, apology, and all the other things that should come with this. I think this House needs to remember also that, but for the tenacity and the persistence of Sir Alan Bates, this issue may never have come to light. So, for me, as a sitting MP, the question I have for you is I think it's essential that we make sure as a House that the loss of confidence in the state, this is an issue of the state versus the individual, we have to reassure the individual that the state is not going to bully them. And that means a full investigation, and those people who brought arguably what are malicious prosecutions must be brought to book. And I'd like his reassurance that that will happen.
Well, I thank him for his question, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with that very much. I think this in itself is a major scandal, but the need to make sure the wider lessons, the wider lack of trust, as he correctly outlines, is addressed in our response is absolutely fundamental to that. I've said myself many times the fact that it is possible, it is conceivable, that we never discovered the scale of this injustice were it not for the campaigners themselves. That is shocking, and that is something we all must reflect very deeply on.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for his comments, but also for his recognition this is about more than redress, it's about the restoration of trust. The long shadow that this has cast in constituencies across the country. In my constituency, after years where submasters were desperately trying to keep post offices open in the face of programmes of closures, we now face a challenge to get people to go into the post office in the first place. I wonder what his message is to people considering that and wondering whether the culture has changed. And I wonder what lessons he thinks the new government is drawing across the public sector to make sure that there is candour and that the culture that we saw in the post office isn't replicated anywhere else.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I recognise very much what he is saying, and as I said in some of my earlier answers, there is an absolute need not just to provide redress to this scandal, to learn the lessons in terms of the future operation for the post office, the future operation of all institutions of the state, but crucially, in answer to his specific question, to make sure that we have a business model in place that rewards postmasters with a decent return for providing an essential service in an organisation that supports their frontline activities in a way which gives again them the income and the prosperity they deserve for being involved in that.
Robin Swan.
I think the Secretary of State and the Secretary of State knows there's 26 postmasters in Northern Ireland wrongly convicted, but I do thank him for his work with the Northern Ireland Executive and bringing forward legislative processes. Can I seek his reassurance that the redress scheme, the appeal scheme, will be equally open to those Northern Ireland post offices who were wrongly convicted because of a UK-wide scheme, and that the redress scheme applies to them as well?
I also thank the honourable member for that question. It has been, I think people are aware, fairly challenging to have a situation where justice is a devolved issue across the United Kingdom, and at times that's been something which has affected the debate in this House very much. I do believe that is the case. I will write to him specifically, however, about the Northern Irish situation to make sure I'm giving him the absolute information that he needs.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly welcome the Secretary of State's announcement and look forward to it proceeding to the necessary conclusion. Redress is about righting wrongs, but there was more than one wrongdoer in this. There also was fiducia. Last week, the Prime Minister told us that firms that had fallen short in Grenfell would be removed from government contracts. Bearing in mind fiducia's actions, bearing in mind that there was at least one suicide on foot of their actions, will they be treated in the same way, and will there be redress against their unlawful actions as well?
Well, I agree with the honourable member that is a crucial and important question. I welcome Fujitsu acknowledging their moral responsibility in relation to these matters. I understand they are participating fully with the Sir Wyn Williams inquiry. We will need that inquiry to conclude. We shouldn't preempt that in any way and take any decisions before that process has been done properly, given it's something that we all support. But I do believe that accountability will flow from that inquiry, and that will be an important step, and it will affect many, many organisations who've been a part of this story, but Fujitsu will clearly be one of them.
Right, that completes that part of the statement. Let the front benches change over.